He placed his hand at the small of her back, and the most dangerous thing about it was how unhurried it was. Cole had been laughing 30 seconds ago, genuinely laughing, the kind that means you believe you've already won. And now he was standing on the Seoul courthouse steps watching his wife of 9 years step out of a bulletproof Maybach beside a man who hadn't been photographed in public since 2021. A man whose name, when his attorney finally whispered it, made the legal team on Cole's side go very quiet, very fast. Grace didn't look at her husband once. She adjusted her sunglasses, let the morning light scatter off her gold bracelet, and walked up those steps like she had been building to this exact moment in the dark for years. Because she had been, and because somewhere in the 3 months between the piano bar and this courthouse, Kim Myung-gil had stopped being her strategy and started being her problem. And she didn't yet know which of those things was more dangerous. If you are new here, hit subscribe right now because this story is going somewhere you are not prepared for. And I promise you, by the time this video ends, you will need part 2 immediately. Now, let's go back to where this actually started. The bar was the kind of place that charged for silence. Grace had chosen it because she needed somewhere expensive enough that no one she knew could afford to find her. She had been sitting at the corner table for 47 minutes and had not touched her drink. She was not crying. She had cried already. In the car, precisely, with the windows up, for 12 minutes. And she had permitted herself exactly that and no more. Now she was listening to the piano. And now she was frowning at the piano. The piece was Debussy, Clair de Lune. She had loved it since she was 9 years old, when her grandmother had played it on an upright with 3 broken keys and made it sound like falling water anyway. She knew every bar of it, every breath of it, and the pianist was playing the modulation in the second movement wrong, not badly. Technically, his fingers were clean. But the emotional intention was off. He was playing the louder passage like an argument when it was supposed to be a question. The difference was not in the notes. It was in the space between them. Grace looked up. There was a man at the bar. He had been there when she arrived, she realized. She had noted him in the peripheral way you note expensive furniture, as an element of the room rather than a subject of it. He was sitting with his back precisely straight, one hand around a glass of something clear, and he was watching the pianist with an expression that Grace recognized immediately because she had been wearing it herself. He was concentrating, not enjoying, analyzing. Their eyes met across the room. He did not look away. Neither did she. In another life, in another story, this would have been the moment for a smile, a nod. Some socially sanctioned softening of the silence. Grace said instead, clearly enough to carry, "He's playing the shift wrong." The man at the bar was quiet for a moment. Then, "Which shift?" Not a question. A test. "Measure 51, she said. "He plays the forte like he's trying to win. It's not a victory. It's a confession." The man turned on his stool to face her fully. In the amber light, his face was unreadable. Not cold exactly, but sealed, the way a document is sealed. Like there was information inside, and you would need specific clearance to access it. "You play," he said. "I used to. Why did you stop?" The question landed with surprising directness. Most people, when they learned she'd stopped something she loved, offered sympathy. He had skipped straight past that to the architecture of the loss, which was either rude or unusually perceptive. "I married someone who needed to be the only expert in the room," Grace said. She wasn't sure why she said it. She had not planned to say anything personal to anyone tonight. She had a working theory that the drink she hadn't touched had loosened something anyway. The man regarded her for a long moment. Then he picked up his glass, and he walked across the room and sat down at her table. Not asking, not hovering for permission, simply deciding, the way you decide to open a window. And he said, "Tell me what the second movement is supposed to feel like." Grace looked at him. "Why?" "Because I have been coming to this bar for 3 months and that pianist has played that piece wrong every single night," he said. And you are the first person who has noticed. She should have found that arrogant. She found it instead deeply, specifically interesting. It's supposed to feel like standing at the edge of something you can't take back, she said, like the second before a decision. The music doesn't resolve because the feeling doesn't resolve. If he plays it like an answer, he kills it. The man was quiet. Yes, he said simply. They sat in the amber light of a bar designed for silence, and they talked about a piano piece for 2 hours, and Grace never once thought to ask his name. His name was Kim Myung-gil. She would learn this later, when it was already too late to have done anything differently. Cole's lead attorney had the practiced confidence of a man who had never lost a case he expected to win. The plaintiff has no documented income, no independent assets on record, and no professional engagements of substance for the duration of the marriage, he said, adjusting his glasses. She is seeking 30% of the respondent's holdings she contributed nothing to building. Cole sat back in his chair with the posture of a man watching a sporting event he already knew the outcome of. His mistress, a woman named Yeon-ji, slim, careful-eyed, seated in the gallery, watched the proceedings with an attention that was not quite casual. Grace sat straight. Her hands were still. She was wearing the emerald suit she'd been photographed in that morning, and she had not yet removed her sunglasses, which was technically inappropriate in a courtroom and which the judge had not yet asked her about. Myung-gil's attorney, a woman named Park So-yeon, who spoke in a register so measured it felt like surgical precision, waited until Cole's team finished. Then she placed a single document on the table. "We would like to enter Exhibit A into the record," she said. The court officer walked it to the judge. Cole's attorney frowned. "We haven't been provided with—" "It was filed this morning at 9:03, Park So-yeon said pleasantly. "You would have received the notification 11 minutes ago." The judge reviewed the document. His expression shifted in that way that courtroom faces shift when something genuinely unexpected has appeared. Not dramatically, just a slight recalibration behind the eyes. "Counsel," he said, looking at Cole's table, "are you aware that the land parcel registered under the address of Park Jaewon Holdings, the land on which your client's corporate headquarters currently sits, is titled in the name of Kim Grace?" The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the silence that had existed before. "That's her maiden name," Park So-yeon added helpfully. Cole turned slowly in his chair. For the first time that morning, he looked at Grace. She had removed her sunglasses. She looked back at him with an expression that was not triumphant. It was something quieter and more final than triumph. It was the look of a woman who had been patient for a very long time and had simply stopped. "That land was purchased under her name as part of a trust structure established 8 years ago," Park So-yeon continued. "At the time, your client signed the transfer documents as a witness. He signed them himself. He either did not read what he was witnessing, or he did not believe she would ever retain independent counsel competent to notice." Cole's attorney was whispering something urgent and low. Cole was not listening. Cole was still looking at Grace. "We have 14 additional exhibits," Park So-yeon said pleasantly. "We won't need all of them today." Cole came down the steps ahead of his legal team, and he walked directly toward Grace with the specific forward lean of a man who has decided that volume will solve the problem volume created. "You set me up," he said. "You've been planning this." "Mr. Park." The voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Myung-gil stepped forward one step. Just one. His hands were in his pockets. His expression remained entirely, architecturally still. But something about the quality of the air around him changed. The way the air changes in a room when a door opens onto winter. Cole stopped. Myung-gil looked at him with the patient, precise attention of a man reading a document he finds mildly tedious. "The next time you say her name," he said quietly, "it will be to sign the papers I have already drafted." He did not elaborate. He didn't gesture. He simply held Cole's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. The amount of time it takes for a person to genuinely understand that they have encountered something they are not equipped for. And then he turned and placed his hand at Grace's back again and walked her toward the car. Grace allowed it. She was not sure, in that moment, what the permission meant. She filed it under later, the way she had filed many things lately. The security rationale is practical, Myungil had said, when he explained that she would be staying at his estate during the proceedings. And non-negotiable? Grace had asked. And non-negotiable. He had confirmed. She had moved in on a Thursday with 2 suitcases and a box of architectural sketches she hadn't looked at in 4 years. His staff had placed them in her suite with an efficiency that suggested they had received very specific instructions. For the first 3 days, she barely saw him. He was present in the way that high-pressure systems are present. You knew he was there by what changed. The coffee in the kitchen was exactly right at 6:45 a.m., which she had not told anyone was when she woke. The south-facing reading room had been unlocked by the second morning when she had stood outside it the first evening, looking at the books through the glass door. A file appeared on the desk in her suite containing the full translated discovery record from Cole's financial statements, materials that had taken his legal team 3 weeks to compile. She had read them in one sitting. On the 4th day, she found him at the piano. It was nearly midnight. She had been unable to sleep and had come for water and had followed the sound down the hall without thinking about it, the way you follow something familiar and beloved before you are quite awake enough to second-guess yourself. He was playing Claire de Lune. He was playing it wrong. "You're doing it again," she said. He stopped. "The shift," she said. "Measure 51. You're still playing it like you're trying to win." He did not turn around immediately. When he did, there was something in his expression she hadn't seen there before. A very small displacement, like a single weight had been moved on a very carefully balanced scale. "Show me," he said. Grace looked at him. Then she walked to the bench and sat down beside him, close enough that her shoulder was a breath from his, and she placed her hands on the keys. She played the passage. She played it the way it was supposed to be played, like standing at the edge of something you cannot take back. The notes didn't resolve. They hung in the cold air of his glass and steel apartment and trembled. When she finished, the silence was different from any silence she had heard since she arrived in Seoul. His hands covered hers on the keys, not moving, just there, present. The weight of them was not possessive this time. It was something more uncertain and more honest than that. "Again," he said quietly. She played it again. His fingers followed hers, not guiding, not teaching, learning, feeling the spaces between the notes the way she had described them, the place where the decision hadn't been made yet. The candlelight was the warmest thing in the room. She was not thinking about Cole. She was not thinking about the court date or the 14 exhibits or the land title in her maiden name. She was thinking about the fact that his shoulder was now against hers, and that the warmth of it was entirely involuntary, and that she was in a very great deal of trouble. "Why do you have your mother's piano?" she said, because she needed to say something that was not what she was thinking. He was quiet for a moment. "She played it the way you just did," he said. "I have been trying to learn it for 11 years. Grace turned her head. He was looking at the keys. "I think," she said carefully, "that might be because you keep playing it like an answer." Something moved through his face. The same displacement, wider this time. He turned to look at her. They were very close. The candlelight was in his eyes, and he looked. For the first time since she had met him. For the first time possibly in years. Like a man who did not know what he was going to do next. Her phone lit up on the side table across the room. She didn't move to get it. It lit up again. And again. Something in the pattern of it. Insistent. Specific. The way a notification pulses when something important has arrived made her stomach drop before she understood why. She crossed the room. The notification was a video file, sender unknown. No. Caption. She pressed play. The footage was grainy in the way security footage is grainy. Overhead angle, Time stamped 3 days ago. A parking garage. And in the parking garage, very clearly, unmistakably, Myung-gil. Standing with a woman Grace recognized. Yeonji, Cole's mistress. They were not arguing. They were not confrontational. They were talking. Close, low, purposeful. The way people talk when they share a language no one else in the room speaks. Myung-gil's hand was on Yeonji's arm. Familiar. Not romantic. Something worse. Conspiratorial. The video ended. Grace stood in the middle of the room in her bare feet with the phone warm in her hand and the cold blue light of his monitors at the edge of her vision and the piano keys still ringing with the last note she had played. Still unresolved, still hanging, still the sound of standing at the edge of something you cannot take back. She turned around. He was watching her from the piano bench. He had not moved. His expression had returned to its default, sealed, architectural, revealing nothing. And for the first time since the morning she had stepped out of that Maybach and walked up the courthouse steps with his hand at her back, Grace understood that she did not know, could not know, whether that hand had been protecting her or positioning her. "Who?" she said, and her voice was very quiet. "Is Yeonji to you?" The piano held its silence. And Kim Myung-gil, the man who never appeared in public, who never let anyone close enough to track the rhythm of his heartbeat, looked at her across the length of his cold, beautiful apartment and said nothing at all. She's standing in his apartment. She has the footage, and he is saying nothing. Subscribe right now because what happens next is not what you see coming, and I need you to understand. Everything you think you know about why he found her? You're wrong. Hit subscribe. The silence between them had texture. Grace had spent 9 years in a marriage where silence meant evasion, where the absence of an answer was itself the answer, and the answer was always, "I don't respect you enough to lie well." She had learned to read silence like weather. She knew the difference between a man who said nothing because he had nothing, and a man who said nothing because what he had was too large to hand over carelessly. She was not yet sure which kind of silence this was. "I'm going to ask you one more time," she said. "And I need you to understand that whatever you say next determines whether I walk out of this apartment tonight and finish this alone." Myung-gil looked at her. Then he stood up. He crossed the room. Not quickly, not dramatically. And he held out his hand. "Give me the phone," he said. She didn't move. Grace. It was the first time he had used her name without the formality of context around it. No title, no last name, no transactional frame. Just her name, in his voice, at midnight, in a room full of cold blue light and one candle. She gave him the phone. He looked at the video. He watched it fully, expressionless. Then he set the phone on the side table, screen down, and he looked at her with something she could only describe as the specific exhaustion of a man who had prepared for every contingency except honesty. "I knew who she was before Cole did," he said. Grace went very still. "Her name is not Yeonji, it's Park Chae-rin. She was an analyst in my network for 4 years, smart, precise. I trusted her with mid-tier intelligence operations, which means I trusted her with more than I should have." A beat. "She disappeared from my organization 14 months ago. 3 months later, she appeared in Cole's life as his mistress." "That's not a coincidence," Grace said. "No." "So, when you found me at the courthouse—" "I had been tracking her for 11 months, he said. "I knew she had attached herself to Cole. I did not know why until I started looking at what Cole actually had access to." Grace felt something cold move through her. Not fear exactly, but the particular sensation of a map rearranging itself, the landscape of the last 3 months reorganizing into a shape she hadn't been standing inside correctly. "She's not after Cole," Grace said slowly. "No. She's after me." He didn't confirm it immediately. What he did was cross to the monitors on the far wall and open a file. A deep, layered document that loaded in columns Grace recognized immediately as financial architecture. Shell company structures, offshore registry chains, the signature topology of a legacy fund built to be invisible. Her legacy fund. The one she had spent 6 years building inside the margins of her marriage, in stolen hours, with the kind of focused silence that looks, from the outside, like a woman who has accepted her diminishment. She needs the encryption keys to access the fund's core registry, Myongil said. The fund itself is untouchable. You built it correctly. But the keys, if extracted, would allow someone to impersonate the account holder. Not steal the money. Something more targeted. Reattribute the assets, Grace said. Make it look like the fund was always a front. Destroy the legal foundation before I can use it. Before you can use it to build the foundation. Grace looked at him. He was looking at her work on the screen, at the architecture she had built in secret, in the dark, in the years when Cole was in the next room telling dinner guests she was decorative, and his expression was not what she expected. It was not analysis. It was not the cold efficiency of a man assessing a useful asset. It was something she recognized belatedly, with a kind of quiet vertigo, as reverence. "You've been using my divorce as bait," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of facts being laid out, in order. Yes. To draw her out. Yes. And the meeting in the garage? I let her believe I was open to negotiation, he said. I was recording the conversation. Her own words are now part of a sealed legal filing that Park So-yeon submitted to the court registry this morning. You should have told me. Yes. The simplicity of it stopped her. No defense, no elaborate justification, no architecture of reasons, just yes. Like he had already had this exact argument with himself and lost. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a long moment. Because telling you would have required explaining how I found you, he said. And explaining how I found you would have required admitting that I had been looking for a reason to find you since the night at the piano bar. Grace looked at him for a long time, then she walked to the monitor and leaned in and started reading the file. We need to accelerate the legal timeline, she said. If Chae-rin is already in contact with Cole's team, they'll try to move before the next hearing. She pulled out the chair and sat down. Pull the full registry chain for the second shell tier, she said. I want to see what she already has access to and what she's been reaching for. Myong-gil stood behind her. He placed his hands on the back of the chair. You're not leaving, he said. It wasn't a question. It was the specific relief of a man who had not realized he was holding his breath. I'm not leaving, Grace said. But we are going to have a very detailed conversation about operational transparency. Agreed, he said. And then, quietly, like a man doing something for the first time, he reached past her and pulled up the next file. Grace worked the way she had always worked when no one was watching, which was to say, ferociously. She pulled Chae-rin's access attempts apart layer by layer. The woman was good. She had the discipline of someone trained in intelligence infrastructure, and she had used Cole's access credentials as a ladder into the outer edges of the fund's registry with the patience of someone who knew she had time. She did not, as it turned out, have time. Here, Grace said on the second morning, pushing a printed document across the table to Myong-gil's senior analyst. This is the entry point she's been trying to widen. She's not going for the keys directly. She's trying to create a duplicate authentication path. If she completes it, she can file a retroactive beneficiary claim. The analyst looked at the document. Then he looked at Myong-gil. She's right, he said. We missed this. Close the path, Myong-gil said, and flag every account in the second tier for manual verification. That's 47 accounts. Then start now. Grace was already on the next page. What Myong-gil noticed. What he could not stop noticing, in the way you cannot stop noticing a specific quality of light once you have seen it. was the way she held two tracks simultaneously. She was dismantling Chae-rin's approach with one hand and reinforcing her own structure's legal immunity with the other, building and defending in the same motion, the way a surgeon sutures while still cutting. She hadn't done this for 9 years. Or rather, she had done it underground, in stolen hours, in the margins of a life someone else had decided she was limited to. He watched her work and felt something he did not have efficient vocabulary for, something that lived adjacent to anger, at the specific waste of it. 9 years. The woman sitting at his table, running analytical circles around his entire senior team, had spent 9 years being described as unskilled by a man who had signed his own corporate land title without reading it. On the third day, she looked up and found him watching her. "You have a tell," she said. "I don't have tells. You press your thumb against your index finger when you're thinking about something you haven't said yet," she said, without looking away from the document. "You've been doing it for 40 minutes. He looked down at his hand. He was, in fact, pressing his thumb against his index finger. "What were you going to say?" she asked. A long pause. "That I am sorry," he said. "For the months you spent in that marriage being told you were less than what you are. I know that apology is not mine to make. I am making it anyway." Grace set down her pen. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully parse, something between moved and resistant to being moved, like a woman who had learned that tenderness had a cost and was quietly doing the math. "Kim Myung-gil," she said. "Yes. Do not make me like you, more than is strategically advisable right now." He held her gaze. "I'll try to be less likable," he said. "You're doing terribly at it," she said, and picked up her pen. Grace had not wanted to attend. "Cole will be there," she had said. "Yes," Myung-gil had said. "Chae-rin will be there." "Almost certainly." "And you want us to walk in together?" "I want you to walk in however you choose to walk in," he said. "I will be beside you regardless." She had looked at him for a moment with the expression she had been wearing more frequently lately, the one that was trying, with partial success, to remain professionally calibrated in the face of evidence that was accumulating against it. "Fine," she had said. "But I'm choosing what I wear." He had been very visibly not smiling. The gala was in full effect by the time they arrived. Champagne in tall flutes, conversations about money conducted in the language of art. Cole was already there, predictably central, predictably loud, his arm around Chae-rin in a red dress that had been chosen to be noticed. Cole saw them arrive. Grace watched the specific layered process of his confidence curdle. The initial startle, the recovery attempt, the slide into performance mode that was Cole's default setting when he felt cornered. He leaned to his attorney, said something low, and then straightened and began moving toward them with the stride of a man who had decided that a public venue was a protection. "Grace." He said her name like a press release. "Glad you came. There's actually something I need to address in front of witnesses." He raised his voice just enough. A few nearby conversations dimmed. "That Maybach you've been photographed arriving in. According to our records, that vehicle was purchased through a company account that falls within the marital asset pool. My team will be filing an injunction Monday to Mr. Park." Myung-gil stepped forward. He was holding a tablet. He held it out to Cole with the same energy a man might use to hand someone a bill. Utterly calm, practically bored. The gesture of someone for whom this moment had already ended, before it began. Cole looked at the tablet. His attorney materialized at his shoulder and looked at it too. The color left Cole's face in stages, the way color leaves a photograph left too long in sunlight. "What is this?" Cole said. "A summary," Myung-gil said pleasantly. "The full documentation has already been filed. The vehicle in question was purchased through a holding company whose beneficial ownership, upon forensic audit, traces to Grace's legacy trust. The vehicle is hers. The building your headquarters occupies is hers. The 3 offshore accounts you restructured in February are currently frozen pending review by the Financial Services Commission, whose investigator received the relevant materials this morning. A pause. Your champagne, Myung-gil added, glancing at the glass in Cole's hand, is presumably still yours. Cole's hand tightened on the glass. Chae-rin, beside him, had gone very still in her red dress. Her eyes moved to Myung-gil, with a specific, careful precision, not panicked, but recalibrating. A professional, even now, making decisions. Myung-gil looked at her. He looked at her the way you look at a door you have already locked from the outside. The filing also includes your recorded conversation from the parking garage, he said quietly, only to her. All of it, including the part where you describe the original mandate. That conversation is now with the prosecutor's office. Chae-rin said nothing. Her face was architecture. I trained you well, he said. You should have stayed. He turned back. Grace was standing 2 feet away watching, and her expression was something he felt in his chest before he interpreted it in his mind. The look of a woman watching a man she trusts choose her, publicly and without hesitation, over every other calculation available to him. The nearby conversations had gone entirely quiet. Cole set down his champagne. He and his attorney left without finishing their drinks. The final hearing lasted 41 minutes. Park So-yeon presented the forensic audit in 3 sections. She did not dramatize. She did not editorialize. She laid documents on the table with the quiet confidence of a woman who knows that the truth, presented clearly, does not require decoration. By the end of the first section, Cole's attorney had stopped taking notes. By the end of the second, Cole had stopped looking at anyone in the room. The third section, Grace's legacy trust, its legal standing, its decade of meticulous structure, was entered into the record complete and uncontested. The judge reviewed the final page. He looked up at Cole. Does the respondent have any documentation to dispute the beneficial ownership claim? Cole's attorney stood. Your Honor, we would request a continuance to. You had 7 weeks, the judge said, not unkindly. The request is denied. He looked back at the documents, then he signed. Grace did not cry. She had told herself she wouldn't, and she honored the promise. But her hands, folded on the table, pressed together hard enough that the pressure was its own kind of release. Everything she had built in the dark, in the margins, in the years when she was being described as nothing. It was real. It was recorded. It was hers. Myung-gil sat beside her. He did not look at her immediately. He looked straight ahead at the bench with the sealed expression she knew now, knew well, knew as the face of a man feeling something too large to display in a room full of people. Under the table, his hand found hers. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. His hand covered hers the way it had covered her hands on the piano keys. Not possessive, not directive. Just there. Present. The weight of someone who had decided without announcement that your warmth was worth the exposure of his. She turned her palm over. She held on. The foundation had taken its first formal case 3 weeks ago, a family in Busan. A land claim misappropriated during a corporate expansion in 2019. The kind of case that required exactly the kind of forensic architecture Grace had spent a decade quietly perfecting, and which she had walked her new team through with the calm, specific authority of a woman who had always known what she was for, even when no one around her did. She was standing at the railing, reading the case update on her phone, when she heard him behind her. The transition is complete, Myung-gil said. She turned. He was holding a document, clean, formal, the kind of paperwork that meant something permanent had been decided. The corporate restructuring, he said. The syndicate is legally dissolved. The remaining operations have been transferred to a registered consulting firm, licensed, compliant, above board. A beat. My attorneys find me significantly less interesting to work for now. Grace looked at him. You didn't have to do that, she said. No, he agreed. Your entire professional identity was built in that structure. Yes. Myung-gil. I know. Why? He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved between them. The city burned gold at the edges. Because I spent 11 years building a world that was the right size for a man who believed caring about anything was a liability, he said. And then I sat down at a piano bar, and a woman told me that the note everyone else plays like an answer is actually a question, and I have been living inside that question ever since. Grace looked at him for a long time. You're terrible at this, she said. The vulnerability. You look like you're filing a tax return. I am aware, he said. I'm working on it. How's that going? Poorly, he said, but with commitment. She laughed. A real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind Cole had spent 9 years engineering out of her because her joy had made him feel small. It rang off the rooftop railing and disappeared into the gold air of the Seoul evening. Myong-gil looked at her laugh the way you look at something you did not know you were starving for until it was in front of you. He crossed the distance between them. He did not drop to one knee. There was no ring, no rehearsed speech, no performance of a moment designed to be photographed. What he did was stop in front of her. Close, real, present. And he held out his hand the way you hold something out when you are done pretending you're not offering it. I want to be your partner, he said. In the foundation, in whatever you build next, in everything that is none of my business and all of my concern. A breath. I want to be someone you call when the case is hard and someone who is already there when you don't call at all. I want to learn the rest of the piece. Grace looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. At the sealed, precise, architectural face that she had learned to read like a second language, where every small movement was a sentence and every silence was a declaration. You still play the forte wrong, she said. You'll teach me, he said. I'll try, she said. She took his hand. He pulled her in, not urgently, not roughly, but with the deep, unhurried certainty of a man who had spent his entire adult life calculating exits and had decided, for the first time, not to look for one. His other hand came to her jaw, tilting her face up, and when he kissed her, it was the way the piano piece was supposed to feel. Not a victory, not an answer. A question, finally, that neither of them needed to resolve. Behind them, the Seoul skyline burned amber and gold, his cold glass world and her warm, living one blurring at the horizon into something neither of them had been before, and both of them were just beginning to learn the shape of. And that is the whole story. From a courthouse where she was laughed at to a rooftop where she built something that will outlast everyone who doubted her. From a man who built an empire on the principle that caring was a liability, to a man who dissolved that empire because one woman's laugh on a cold rooftop was worth more than all of it. Grace didn't need to be rescued. She needed a world with enough space to stop hiding. And Myong-gil didn't need to be softened. He needed a question he couldn't answer alone. If this story hit differently, if you felt every piece of it, then you already know what to do. Hit subscribe. Because this channel exists for exactly this. The stories where the woman walks in and the room goes quiet. Where the man who never shows his face in public decides she is worth being seen for. Where the ending isn't, she survived. It's, she arrived. We do this every week. Subscribe. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit hardest. Was it the piano? The courtroom? The paper guillotine? The rooftop? Tell me. I read them all, and I'll see you in the next one.